Here we have the Dendrobium orchid. It's one of the orchids that is lesser known, but it's coming into more popularity. Very similar in care or an ease of care as the Phalaenopsis orchids, you know, the ones that you get at grocery stores and whatnot. But these ones are especially cool because not only are they really easy to grow, but oftentimes their flowers are fragrant, which is something we don't really get with the Phalaenopsis orchid, so it's a nice little option to have. So if you are a beginner orchid grower, this is a fantastic place to start or to grow your collection of orchids. Anyway, let's get into the care instructions for these guys. The very first thing we're going to need is very bright light. To get them to bloom like this, to make sure they're re-blooming every year, you want to give them pretty bright light. It doesn't have to be like right up in the windowsill, but you still want to make sure that the leaves are getting a very wide view of the sky. That's going to be most important for the health of your plant. Next, we will talk about watering. So when you water these ones, the roots are not going to turn a different color. They're not as communicative as the Phalaenopsis orchids for that or in that reason. But what you're going to want to do during the growing months, so that's the springtime through the summertime, they're going to like a lot of water. So anytime that the topsoil is dry, you're going to give it a really thorough soak, making sure you're saturating the entire root system. In the fall and winter months, they actually go into quite a bit of a dormancy, and they're not going to need hardly any water at all. In fact, from about November to early spring, you're probably not going to have to water at all. If you do have to water, it's just going to be a very quick little flush, maybe once or twice during that sort of rest period, because they're in a dormancy, they're not really growing, they're just taking that winter rest to sort of recharge and get ready for the growing season. During that time, during that winter dormancy, if these canes are getting really wrinkly, they'll get shriveled up, and you'll notice quite a bit of difference. If that's the case, then you can water it, give it a really quick flush of water. Just run the faucet over the topsoil here and get those roots kind of activated. Let these canes fill up with water a little bit more. But they are fairly drought tolerant for that reason, because they're not getting much water at all during the winter season. So it's not a big deal to worry about these characters during that time. Next, we will talk about potting medium. Okay, so what I like to plant these in is just regular old orchid bark. They tend to want more air to their roots than Phalaenopsis orchids. Oftentimes with Phalaenopsis orchids you can plant in long fiber sphagnum moss. I wouldn't with these guys, just keep it in orchid bark. It's much more airy, and the roots are allowed to dry out a little bit quicker, which is what these prefer. So I just put them in regular old orchid bark, and that seems to do the trick. As far as fertilizing, they're much less picky as well, so that's very nice also. They don't need a specific orchid fertilizer. So you can just do a regular general purpose houseplant fertilizer. I just do 16-16-16, well balanced, and I do that every other week during the growing season. So that's springtime through the summertime. Now when I say springtime, what I mean is when it comes out of that winter dormancy in early spring usually, you'll start to see new growth. Remember, during the fall and winter months, it's not going to have any new growth on it at all. It's just going to stop growing, and that's when you know it has really entered its dormancy. But when you start seeing new growth, that's the time to start continuing with your spring and summer watering schedule. Whenever it is dry on top, you give it a really thorough soak. But that's going to do it for the care instructions for the Dendrobium orchids. If you have any questions about these plants, let me know in the comment section below. Or of course, you can always message me on Facebook or Instagram at Tanner the Planter.